First-class passengers only. Please step back.
The announcement echoed through JFK Terminal 7 as snow continued to fall outside the massive windows. Christmas night had turned into a travel nightmare. 3 hours of delays, overbooked flights, and thousands of stranded passengers filled every corner of the terminal with frustration and exhaustion. Gate 47 buzzed with activity as British Airways Flight 185 finally prepared for boarding. The red-eye to London was supposed to depart at 8:30 p.m. Now, approaching midnight, passengers clutched their boarding passes like lifelines. Ladies and gentlemen, we sincerely apologize for the delay announced. The gate agent, her voice strained from repeating the same message for hours. Weather conditions have improved and we're ready to begin boarding our Christmas night service to London Heathrow. We'll start with first class, followed by business, and then economy by zones. The first-class lounge had been a sanctuary of calm compared to the chaos outside. Leather chairs, complimentary champagne, and the soft hum of quiet conversations. But even here, tension crackled in the air. Holiday travel brought out the worst in people, and Christmas night was particularly brutal. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the tarmac glittered with ice. De-icing trucks worked methodically around the British Airways 777, their orange lights cutting through the darkness. Snow fell in thick flakes, creating a winter wonderland that was beautiful to look at but hell to fly through. All first-class passengers welcome aboard called Sophia Ramirez, adjusting her British Airways scarf as she prepared to greet the premium cabin guests. At 28, Sophia was relatively new to the first-class service, having been promoted just 6 months earlier. Tonight felt different. The delayed departure, the holiday stress, the demanding passengers she'd already dealt with in the lounge. Her colleague, Jessica Collins, stood beside her tablet in hand. At 24, Jessica was even newer to the job, and the pressure showed on her face. "I've never seen the first-class passengers." "This agitated?" she whispered to Sophia. "Mrs. Montgomery has already complained twice about the champagne temperature, and we haven't even boarded." "It's Christmas night," Sophia replied, forcing a smile. "Everyone's trying to get home or away for the holidays. Just remember our training. Kill them with kindness no matter what." The jet bridge extended like a mechanical arm reaching for the aircraft door. Inside the plane, the first-class cabin gleamed under soft LED lighting. 14 seats in a 1-2-1 configuration, each a mini sanctuary of leather and technology. The air smelled of fresh orchids and the faint scent of expensive cleaning products. Outside, the boarding area erupted in controlled chaos. First-class passengers lined up with their distinctive burgundy priority tags. Many clutching phones and tablets, their faces illuminated by screens showing weather updates and connection information. "Merry Christmas Eve. Welcome aboard Flight 185. Sophia greeted each passenger as they entered the aircraft. Her smile was genuine despite the long day. She'd grown up in Queens, the daughter of immigrants who cleaned office buildings at night so their children could have better opportunities. This job meant everything to her family. Jessica checked boarding passes and directed passengers to their seats. 2A, right this way. Can I take your coat? The first passengers filed in slowly. A businessman from investment banking already on his phone discussing market closures. An elderly couple celebrating their 50th anniversary with a London vacation. A tech executive who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Then she walked on. Even at midnight on Christmas, after hours of delays and frustration, Victoria Ashford made an entrance. At 42, she possessed the kind of beauty that money could buy and maintain. Platinum blonde hair fell in perfect waves past her shoulders. Her emerald silk dress hugged her curves in all the right places, expensive enough to feed a family for months. Diamond earrings caught the cabin light, and her Hermes bag probably cost more than most people's cars. But it wasn't her appearance that filled the space. It was her attitude. The way she looked around the first-class cabin like she was inspecting a hotel room she might reject. The way she handed her coat to Jessica without acknowledging her as a human being. The way her eyes swept over the other passengers with the cool calculation of someone determining their net worth. Seat 2A, Victoria announced, rather than asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. I specifically requested this seat when I boarded. I hope there haven't been any changes. Of course, Mrs. Ashford, Sophia confirmed, checking her tablet. 2A is confirmed. Can I get you a welcome drink, Krug Grande Cuvée, if you have it? If not, I suppose Dom Perignon will suffice. Victoria settled into her seat like a queen claiming her throne. And I'll need extra pillows. The ones you provide are barely adequate. Jessica scurried away to fulfill the requests while Sophia continued greeting passengers. The cabin was filling up, but slowly. Holiday travel meant lots of last-minute changes, upgrades, and special requests. Through the oval windows, the snow continued to fall. Ground crews worked tirelessly to keep the runways clear, but Mother Nature seemed determined to make Christmas travel as difficult as possible. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison from the flight deck. We're continuing to board passengers and should be ready for pushback within the hour. London weather is looking good, so once we get airborne, it should be smooth sailing. We appreciate your patience on this Christmas evening." Victoria barely looked up from her phone, where she was typing furiously. Her manicured nails clicked against the screen with the rapid-fire precision of someone used to getting immediate responses to her demands. "Excuse me," she called to Sophia, who was helping another passenger. "My champagne." "Coming right up, Mrs. Ashford." The boarding continued. Business class filled with holiday travelers, families headed to London for New Year's Eve, business people trying to beat the post-Christmas rush. The energy in the aircraft was strange. Part excitement for Christmas adventures, part exhaustion from travel delays, part anxiety about weather and connections. Outside, the snow was getting heavier. The de-icing trucks made another pass around the aircraft, their chemicals creating steam in the cold air. Inside the terminal, announcements echoed about further delays and cancellations. Flight 185 was one of the lucky ones still scheduled to depart. Victoria had finished her champagne and was already requesting a second glass. Her phone calls had grown louder, and other first-class passengers were starting to notice. Something about Christmas shopping receipts, tax deductions, and making sure the accountant handles everything properly. "I don't care if it's Christmas, Victoria," said into her phone, her voice carrying across the cabin. "Some things are more important than holidays. Handle it." She hung up with the aggressive tap of someone accustomed to having the last word in every conversation. Around her, the first-class cabin continued to fill with passengers settling in for the overnight flight. But somehow Victoria Ashford had already managed to make the space feel smaller, more tense, as if her presence alone could change the atmosphere. The boarding was nearly complete, but one seat remained empty. Seat 2B, directly across the aisle from Victoria Ashford. The gate agent had mentioned a last-minute passenger, someone who'd been rebooked from an earlier canceled flight. Outside, the snow continued to fall on Christmas night, beautiful and treacherous, setting the stage for a flight that would become international news. The last passenger to board Flight 185 didn't look like he belonged in first class, at least not to anyone judging by appearances alone. Damon Rivers walked down the jet bridge with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd learned that quiet dignity carried more weight than flashy displays of wealth. At 35, Damon stood 6 feet tall with the lean build of someone who ran every morning, rain or shine. His dark skin had a healthy glow despite the long day, and his close-cropped hair was beginning to show just a hint of gray at the temples. Tonight he wore dark jeans, a navy wool sweater, and a leather jacket that had seen years of use but remained stylish. No designer labels, no expensive watch. Nothing that screamed success. But anyone who looked closely might notice the details. The way he carried himself with absolute certainty. The quality of his leather briefcase, worn but well made. The way his eyes took in everything around him, missing nothing, evaluating everything. These were the habits of a man who'd spent years in courtrooms where every detail mattered. "Welcome aboard." Sophia greeted him with a genuine smile. After dealing with demanding passengers all evening, his quiet presence felt refreshing. "Thank you, Damon," replied his voice, warm and cultured. "I appreciate you getting me on this flight. I know it was last minute." "No problem at all. You're in 2B right across there." Sophia gestured to the seat directly across from Victoria Ashford, who looked up from her phone with the expression of someone who'd just detected an unpleasant smell. Damon nodded and made his way to his seat. He placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment with careful precision, then settled into 2B. The leather was soft, the legroom generous. After 3 hours in the airport, any seat would have been welcome, but first class was definitely better than economy. He pulled out his tablet and immediately opened a folder labeled Ashford Technologies, Discrimination Case. The screen filled with legal documents, depositions, and email evidence. Christmas might be a time for family and celebration, but justice didn't take holidays. Tomorrow's emergency court session in London could change hundreds of lives. Across the aisle, Victoria Ashford studied the new passenger with the subtle intensity of a socialite conducting reconnaissance. Her gaze swept from his casual clothes to his worn leather briefcase to his lack of obvious luxury accessories. Her nose wrinkled slightly as if she'd detected something distasteful. "Excuse me," Victoria said to Jessica, who was passing by with warm towels for the first-class passengers. "I think there might be a mistake with seating assignments." Jessica paused, her smile faltering slightly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The gentleman across from me." "Are you certain he's supposed to be in first class?" Victoria's voice carried just enough volume that several nearby passengers could hear. "I mean, I'm sure he's very nice, but this cabin has a certain atmosphere." Damon looked up from his tablet. Their eyes met across the narrow aisle. Victoria's gaze was cold, calculating, full of assumptions. Damon's was steady, patient, and completely unimpressed. "Is there a problem?" Damon asked quietly, his tone neutral but firm. Victoria's smile was razor-sharp. "Oh, no problem at all. I was just making sure everyone was in their proper seat. Sometimes there are mix-ups, you know. People upgrade without realizing the expectations." "I see." Damon's voice remained level. "And what expectations would those be?" Before Victoria could respond, Jessica intervened nervously. "Mr. Rivers, your seat is definitely correct. 2B first class. Can I get you anything to drink?" "Coffee black, please." Damon returned his attention to his tablet, dismissing Victoria with the kind of polite indifference that somehow felt more cutting than any insult. Victoria's cheeks flushed pink. She wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by someone she'd clearly categorized as beneath her social status. Her husband, Richard Ashford, was CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies on the East Coast. They moved in circles where everyone knew everyone, where net worth was discussed as casually as the weather. Jessica Victoria called, her voice slightly sharper than before. "I'd like another champagne. The Krug, not the Dom Perignon." While Jessica hurried to fulfill the request, other passengers were settling in for the long flight. In seat 3A, Michael Torres was setting up his camera equipment. At 31, the Hispanic filmmaker from Los Angeles was documenting his Christmas trip to London, planning to create content about holiday travel in Europe. "Testing, testing," Michael whispered into his camera. "Day 1 of my London Christmas adventure. Currently on British Airways Flight 1985 Christmas night red-eye. The weather's been crazy, but we're finally boarding. First class looks pretty nice, though. There seems to be some tension already." He panned his camera discreetly around the cabin, capturing the holiday decorations, the elegant seating, and inadvertently recording Victoria's increasingly agitated conversation with the flight attendants. 2 rows back, Emma Richardson was setting up her own recording equipment. At 26, the travel blogger from Atlanta had built a successful YouTube channel around luxury travel experiences. Her Christmas Eve livestream was supposed to showcase British Airways' premium service, but the delayed departure had turned into an opportunity to capture real travel drama. "Hey, travel fam," Emma whispered into her phone, which was propped up to show both her face and the cabin behind her. "Emma here. And wow, what a night. We're finally boarding after hours of delays, and let me tell you, the holiday travel struggle is real. But we're in first class on British Airways, so I'm not complaining too much." Her live stream chat was already filling with comments from viewers tuning in on Christmas Eve, many of them dealing with their own travel nightmares or living vicariously through her luxury experience. In the window seat next to the aisle, David Kim was scrolling through news feeds on his laptop. The 29-year-old Korean-American software engineer worked for a tech company in Seattle and was heading to London for a New Year's vacation. But something about the conversation he'd overheard was nagging at him. The name Ashford sounded familiar, connected to something he'd read recently about tech industry scandals. Meanwhile, Damon continued reading through case files, completely absorbed in his work. The lawsuit against Ashford Technologies had consumed his life for the past 18 months. What started as a single complaint from his sister about workplace discrimination had expanded into a class action case representing over 200 current and former employees. The evidence was overwhelming. Internal emails joking about diversity hires, performance reviews that praised minority employees' work but still rated them below promotion thresholds, meeting recordings where executives discussed keeping the company's culture intact, a pattern of bias so clear that even Ashford's own lawyers were advising settlement. But Richard Ashford had refused every offer, confident that his money and connections could outlast any legal challenge. He'd hired the most expensive law firm in New York, filed countless motions to delay and dismiss, and used every legal maneuver available to avoid accountability. What Ashford didn't know was that Damon Rivers had built his reputation on cases just like this. Civil rights law wasn't just his profession, it was his calling. Growing up in Detroit, he'd watched his parents face discrimination in employment, housing, and education. He'd promised himself that when he became a lawyer, he'd make sure others didn't have to endure the same injustices. The case against Ashford Technologies was personal in ways that Damon kept private. His sister Keisha had been one of the company's top software engineers, recruited directly from MIT, with promises of career advancement and innovative projects. Instead, she'd been assigned to administrative tasks, passed over for promotions, and eventually pushed out entirely after complaining about workplace bias. The settlement Damon was seeking wasn't just about money. It was about accountability change and sending a message that even the richest tech bros couldn't buy their way out of justice. Victoria finished her second champagne and was already gesturing for a third. Her phone rang and she answered with the imperious tone of someone important. "Richard." "Yes, I'm finally on the plane. The delays were absolutely ridiculous." "What do you mean, emergency board meeting?" "It's Christmas." "Well, handle it. I'm not dealing with business drama while I'm trying to relax." She hung up with obvious irritation, then noticed Damon watching her. "Something interesting?" she asked coldly. "Just wondering if you always conduct business so publicly?" Damon replied mildly. "Some conversations are better kept private. I don't need advice about discretion from—" Victoria paused, her eyes raking over his appearance once more. "From someone who doesn't understand how real business works." Damon smiled slightly. It was the expression of a poker player holding 4 aces while his opponent complained about their hand. "You'd be surprised what I understand about business, Mrs. Ashford." "Victoria Ashford." She pronounced the name like it should mean something to him. Ashford Damon repeated thoughtfully. "Interesting name. I've been hearing it a lot lately." Victoria's expression sharpened. Something in his tone suggested this wasn't casual conversation. But before she could respond, Captain Morrison's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've received clearance for pushback. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for departure. We're finally on our way to London. As the aircraft began to move away from the gate, none of the first-class passengers realized they were about to become part of a story that would dominate international headlines for weeks. The plane pushed back into the snowy Christmas night, carrying with it a collision of personalities, principles, and pride that would play out at 35,000 feet. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the ugly reality of modern racism and prove that justice, like flights, sometimes arrives exactly when it's needed most. The aircraft taxied slowly through the snow, joining a line of planes waiting for takeoff clearance. Inside the first-class cabin, the subtle dance of air travel etiquette was already breaking down. Victoria Ashford had consumed 3 champagnes in less than 30 minutes, and her inhibitions were dissolving along with her facade of polite society. Jessica Victoria called out, snapping her manicured fingers like summoning a servant. "This champagne is getting warm. Bring me a fresh glass and make sure it's properly chilled this time." Jessica Collins hurried over with a new flute of Krug, her hands slightly trembling. The young flight attendant had dreamed of working international routes, but dealing with entitled passengers wasn't part of her romantic vision of airline service. "Here you are, Mrs. Ashford. Is there anything else I can get you?" "Actually, yes." Victoria's voice carried across the cabin louder than necessary. "I'm concerned about the seating arrangement. I specifically booked first class to avoid certain elements. I don't feel comfortable with the current configuration." Sophia Ramirez, who had been helping passengers stow last-minute items, paused mid-conversation. She'd worked enough flights to recognize the coded language, the careful phrasing that danced around direct accusations. Her stomach tightened with familiar dread. Damon Rivers looked up from his legal files, his expression unchanged, but his attention now fully focused on the conversation across the aisle. He'd heard this song before in boardrooms and courtrooms, restaurants and hotels, the careful, pseudo-polite way that some people expressed their discomfort with sharing space with black faces. "I'm not sure I understand, Mrs. Ashford," Sophia replied carefully. "Is there something specific about your seat that's not satisfactory?" Victoria gestured vaguely toward Damon without quite looking at him directly. "I just think there might be passengers who would be more comfortable in other sections of the aircraft. It's nothing personal, you understand. It's about maintaining the proper atmosphere." The cabin went quiet, except for the steady hum of the engines. Several passengers looked up from their phones and tablets, sensing the tension, but not quite understanding its source. Michael Torres discreetly adjusted his camera angle, sensing that his travel documentation might be capturing something more significant than holiday footage. Emma Richardson's live stream chat was exploding with comments from viewers who were picking up on the subtext of Victoria's complaints. Her follower count was climbing as people shared the stream, sensing drama unfolding in real time. "Proper atmosphere," Damon repeated quietly, his voice carrying just far enough that Victoria could hear him. "Interesting phrase. What exactly would constitute an improper atmosphere?" Mrs. Ashford, Victoria's cheeks flushed, whether from alcohol or anger, wasn't clear. "I don't think I need to explain my concerns to other passengers. This is a matter for the flight crew." "Actually," Sophia interjected diplomatically, "all our passengers have been properly screened and ticketed. Everyone in first class is exactly where they're supposed to be." "I find that very hard to believe," Victoria said, her voice getting sharper. "When I pay for first class, I expect a certain standard. I expect to travel with people who understand proper behavior, who belong in these seats." David Kim looked up from his laptop, his expression darkening as he processed what he was hearing. As a Korean American who'd faced his own share of subtle racism in the tech industry, he recognized the playbook. The careful language, the appeals to standards and atmosphere, the way certain people could make their bigotry sound like quality control. Ma'am, David said quietly, "I think everyone here belongs exactly where they are." Victoria whirled to face him, her composure cracking further. "I wasn't talking to you. This is none of your business." Actually, it kind of is my business, David replied, his voice steady but firm. We're all sharing this cabin. We all paid for our seats. And frankly, the only person disturbing the atmosphere right now is you. How dare you? Victoria's voice rose to near shouting levels. Do you have any idea who I am? Who my husband is? I will not be spoken to this way by... She gestured wildly at David and Damon, her hand shaking with rage and alcohol, clearly searching for words that wouldn't get her in immediate trouble, but would still convey her racial animus. By what Damon asked quietly, setting down his tablet and giving Victoria his full attention. By passengers who paid for their seats. By people who have every right to be here, or by people whose skin color makes you uncomfortable. The directness of his question hit the cabin like a thunderclap. There was no more dancing around the subtext, no more coded language. Damon had called out exactly what everyone was thinking but hadn't wanted to say out loud. Victoria's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She looked around the cabin for support for allies who would validate her position. But the other passengers were staring at her with expressions ranging from embarrassment to disgust. I never said anything about... Victoria stammered, clearly flustered by having her racism exposed so directly. You didn't have to say it, Damon replied calmly. It's been clear from the moment I sat down. The way you looked at me, the comments about proper seating, the concerns about atmosphere. You're not the first person to use polite language to express ugly thoughts. Sophia stood frozen between the seats, unsure how to handle a situation that was spiraling beyond her training manual. She'd dealt with drunk passengers, medical emergencies, and unruly children, but open racial tension in first class was uncharted territory. Emma's live stream chat was going crazy. Comments were flying by too fast to read, but the general sentiment was clear. Viewers were horrified by Victoria's behavior and impressed by Damon's calm responses. Someone had already screen recorded the exchange and was sharing it across social media platforms. Michael Torres had discreetly started recording video, his filmmaker instincts telling him this was becoming something significant. He'd covered social justice issues before, but never from inside an airplane cabin at 35,000 feet. I think Victoria said, struggling to regain her composure, that this conversation is completely inappropriate. I'm a paying customer, and I have the right to travel in comfort without being harassed by other passengers. Harassed. David Kim laughed bitterly. Lady, you've been harassing everyone since you got on this plane. You've been rude to the flight attendants, you've made racist comments about seating, and now you're playing the victim because someone called you out on your behavior. Victoria turned to Sophia with desperate authority. I want him moved. Both of them. I will not tolerate this treatment. My husband is a very important businessman, and when he hears about this... Your husband, Damon, said slowly, as if tasting the words. Richard Ashford, right. CEO of Ashford Technologies. Victoria's expression changed instantly. The mention of her husband's name seemed to sober her slightly, as if she suddenly remembered that her behavior might have consequences beyond this airplane cabin. How do you know my husband's name? She asked warily. Damon smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Let's just say it's been coming up a lot in my work recently. Small world, isn't it? Something in his tone made Victoria's skin crawl. There was knowledge behind his words, a suggestion of familiarity with her husband's business that she couldn't quite place, but alcohol and entitlement overrode her caution. My husband is a very successful man, she said defensively. He has nothing to do with whatever this is. Doesn't he? Damon asked quietly. Because from what I understand, your husband has very strong opinions about who belongs where, about maintaining certain standards and atmospheres, about keeping the right kind of people in the right kind of positions. The color drained from Victoria's face. Something in Damon's words and the specificity of his language triggered alarm bells that even champagne couldn't silence. But pride and prejudice are powerful drugs, and Victoria Ashford had been high on both for most of her adult life. "I don't know what you're implying," she said coldly, "but I won't be threatened by some random passenger who doesn't know his place." The words hung in the air like smoke, toxic and impossible to take back. Every passenger in first class had heard them. The live stream viewers had heard them. The cameras had captured them. And Damon Rivers, civil rights attorney and lead counsel in a $50 million discrimination lawsuit against Ashford Technologies, filed them away as evidence of exactly the kind of mentality his case was designed to expose. "My place," Damon repeated softly. "Interesting choice of words, Mrs. Ashford. Very interesting indeed." Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the intercom as Flight 185 finally received clearance for takeoff. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're next in line for departure. Flight attendants, please take your seats for takeoff." Sophia and Jessica quickly secured the cabin and strapped themselves into their jump seats, both grateful for a temporary respite from the brewing tension. As the Boeing 777 accelerated down the runway, the lights of New York disappeared beneath a blanket of snow, and the aircraft climbed into the dark Christmas sky. But inside the first-class cabin, the real drama was just beginning. As the seatbelt sign turned off and passengers were free to move about the cabin, Damon Rivers opened his briefcase and spread several files across his tray table. The documents bore the letterhead of Rivers and Associates and case numbers that would soon become infamous in legal circles. Victoria Ashford tried to peer across the aisle at his paperwork, her alcohol-fueled curiosity overriding any sense of discretion. She could make out fragments of text: Ashford Technologies, discrimination complaint, class action lawsuit. But the full significance didn't quite penetrate her champagne-clouded mind. "More business documents?" Victoria asked, with false sweetness. "I hope you're not one of those people who works the entire flight. It's Christmas Eve, after all." Damon looked up from a deposition transcript, studying Victoria's face carefully. "Some work can't wait for holidays, Mrs. Ashford. When justice is delayed, it's often justice denied." He turned a page in the file, revealing an internal email from Ashford Technologies. Even from across the aisle, Victoria could see her husband's name in the header. Her blood alcohol level might have been elevated, but her survival instincts were beginning to kick in. "What kind of work do you do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Civil rights law," Damon replied without looking up. "I represent employees who've been discriminated against by their employers. People who've been denied opportunities, harassed, or pushed out of their jobs because of their race, gender, or other protected characteristics." Victoria's champagne glass froze halfway to her lips. "That sounds contentious." "It can be, especially when we're dealing with companies that have deeply embedded cultures of bias. Companies where discrimination isn't just individual prejudice, but institutional policy." Damon's eyes met hers across the aisle. "Companies where the leadership sets a tone that trickles down through every level of the organization." David Kim, who had been listening to the conversation while pretending to work on his laptop, suddenly looked up with recognition. He'd been trying to place where he'd heard the name Ashford recently, and now it clicked. "Wait," David said loud enough that several passengers could hear. "Ashford Technologies. That's the company that's been all over the tech news lately. The discrimination lawsuit." Victoria nearly choked on her champagne. "I don't know what you're talking about. It's been huge in Silicon Valley." David continued, his voice growing more animated. "A major class action case against one of the biggest tech companies on the East Coast. Hundreds of employees claiming racial bias in hiring and promotion. Internal emails, recorded meetings, the whole thing. Emma Richardson's live stream viewers were going crazy in the chat, with many of them now Googling Ashford Technologies lawsuit and sharing links in real time. Her follower count was climbing rapidly as word spread about the drama unfolding on Christmas Eve at 35,000 feet. Michael Torres was now openly filming, having abandoned any pretense of subtle documentation. His filmmaker instincts told him he was witnessing something that would become significant, and he wasn't going to miss it due to false politeness. "The case is scheduled for emergency court proceedings tomorrow," Damon said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the hushed cabin. "Christmas Day might be a holiday, but the British courts agreed to hear our motion for immediate injunctive relief." Victoria's hand was shaking now as she set down her champagne glass. You're the lawyer. I'm the lead counsel for the plaintiffs." "Yes." Damon's voice remained calm, professional. 217 current and former employees of Ashford Technologies, all of whom have experienced workplace discrimination under your husband's leadership. The cabin fell completely silent except for the steady hum of the engines. Even the flight attendants who had returned to their service duties paused to listen to the conversation that was transforming from personal conflict into legal drama. One of those plaintiffs, Damon continued, his voice taking on a slightly more personal tone, "is my sister, Keisha Rivers. She was one of your husband's top software engineers until she was pushed out for complaining about the hostile work environment." Victoria's face went pale beneath her expensive makeup. I don't know anything about the company's personnel decisions." "Don't you?" Damon pulled out a particular document from his file. "Because according to our discovery materials, you were present at several company social functions where employees were discussed, including a country club dinner where someone matching your description made comments about maintaining the company's cultural standards." The blood drained from Victoria's face entirely. She remembered that dinner, remembered the wine, remembered saying things that seemed funny at the time, but would sound horrific in a deposition. "You can't prove that," she whispered. "Actually, we have video," Damon replied matter-of-factly. "The country club has security cameras in the dining areas. Your comments about keeping the company free from urban influences were captured quite clearly." Emma's live stream had now attracted over 10,000 viewers, many of whom were recording the stream and sharing clips across social media. Had Christmas flight. Racism was already starting to trend as people shared the story in real time. Victoria looked around the cabin, desperately seeking escape or allies. But every face she saw reflected disgust, embarrassment, or fascination with the legal drama unfolding. She was trapped at 35,000 feet with the lawyer who was about to destroy her husband's empire, and she'd already said things that would likely become evidence. "This is harassment," she said weakly. "You're using this flight to intimidate me." Mrs. Ashford Damon said gently, "I didn't even know you were on this flight until you started questioning my right to be here. You initiated this conversation. You questioned my presence, my place, my belonging. I'm simply explaining why those attitudes are relevant to my professional work." He gestured to the files spread across his tray table. "Tomorrow morning, a British court will hear evidence about how your husband's company created and maintained a culture of exclusion, how qualified employees were denied opportunities because they didn't fit the cultural profile, how talent was wasted and lives were damaged because people like your husband believed that success belonged to certain types of people." Damon's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "The irony, Mrs. Ashford, is that you've spent this entire flight demonstrating exactly the kind of mindset that led to this lawsuit. The belief that some people belong in first class and others don't. That comfort and respect are privileges reserved for people who look like you." Victoria was trembling now. Whether from alcohol, withdrawal, fear, or rage was impossible to tell. But everyone in the cabin could see that the confident socialite who had boarded the plane was crumbling before their eyes. The plane continued its climb through the Christmas night sky, carrying with it a confrontation that would soon capture international attention and change the lives of everyone on board. The first-class cabin had transformed from a luxury sanctuary into a pressure cooker of tension. As Flight 185 reached cruising altitude somewhere over the Atlantic Victoria, Ashford's carefully constructed mask of sophisticated civility was disintegrating with each passing mile. "I need another drink," Victoria announced loudly, pressing her call button repeatedly until Sophia approached with practiced patience. What can I get for you, Mrs. Ashford? Something stronger than champagne? Vodka. Grey Goose if you have it. A double. Victoria's voice carried the edge of someone losing control but fighting to maintain authority through alcohol and attitude. Sophia hesitated. Victoria had already consumed 4 glasses of champagne and they were barely 2 hours into an 8-hour flight. Perhaps I could bring you some water first, and then I didn't ask for water. Victoria snapped her voice loud enough that passengers in business class were turning to look. I asked for vodka. I'm a first-class passenger, and I expect first-class service. Damon Rivers looked up from his legal documents, his expression thoughtful. He'd seen this pattern before in depositions and courtroom testimonies. When people felt cornered, they often doubled down on displays of power and privilege, using their status as a weapon against perceived threats. Of course, Mrs. Ashford Sophia replied diplomatically. I'll bring that right away. As Sophia walked toward the galley, Victoria's attention returned to Damon with renewed hostility. The alcohol had stripped away her subtle approach, leaving raw prejudice barely concealed beneath a veneer of righteous indignation. You know, Victoria said, her words slightly slurred, I've been thinking about our conversation, about your profession. She pronounced the word like it left a bad taste in her mouth. Ambulance chaser, basically. Making money off people's complaints. Damon set down his pen and gave Victoria his full attention. Is that how you see civil rights law, as ambulance chasing pleas? Everyone knows what you people do. You find disgruntled employees, fill their heads with ideas about discrimination, and convince them to sue instead of taking responsibility for their own failures. The phrase, you people hung in the air like poison gas. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats while others leaned forward with fascination and horror. Emma Richardson's live stream had now attracted over 25,000 viewers. The chat was moving too fast to follow, but the overall sentiment was clear. People were watching a racism masterclass unfold in real time. She'd started the stream as lighthearted travel content, but it had evolved into something much more significant. You people, Damon repeated quietly. That's an interesting phrase, Mrs. Ashford. Who exactly are my people in this context? Victoria's cheeks flushed red, whether from alcohol or the realization that she'd stepped over a line. Lawyers. I meant lawyers. Obviously. Did you? Damon's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. Because in my experience, when someone uses that phrase while staring at a black man, they're usually not talking about professional credentials. David Kim, who had been documenting the exchange on his laptop, looked up sharply. Actually, I've been recording this conversation. You want to know what she said? She said you people while pointing directly at you. The context was pretty clear. Victoria whirled on David with fury. You've been recording me. That's illegal. I didn't consent to being recorded. Actually, Michael Torres chimed in from his seat, gesturing to his camera equipment. We're on an aircraft in international airspace. Different privacy laws apply. Plus, you've been speaking loudly enough that everyone in first class has heard every word. There's no reasonable expectation of privacy. I'm a documentary filmmaker, he continued. I've been filming this entire flight as travel content. Your behavior is now part of that documentation. Victoria looked around the cabin with growing panic. She was surrounded by cameras, recording devices, and witnesses to every word she'd spoken. Her attempt to assert dominance was backfiring spectacularly. Sophia returned with the vodka, her discomfort obvious. Here's your drink, Mrs. Ashford. Victoria snatched the glass and took a large gulp, as if alcohol could somehow erase the last hour of her life. This is harassment, she declared. All of you are harassing me. Actually, said an elderly gentleman from seat 4A who had been quietly observing the drama. You've been the one doing the harassing, madam. I've been traveling first class for 30 years and I've never seen such appalling behavior from a passenger. His refined British accent carried the authority of old-world propriety, and his words seemed to hit Victoria harder than anything else that had been said. To be criticized by someone she would normally consider her social peer was devastating to her sense of status. I'm not harassing anyone," Victoria stammered. "I'm simply trying to enjoy my flight without being subjected to aggressive behavior from people who don't understand proper etiquette." "Aggressive behavior?" Damon's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mrs. Ashford, I've been sitting quietly reading legal documents. You initiated every interaction we've had. You questioned my right to be here, made comments about proper seating arrangements, and used language that multiple witnesses have identified as racially charged. How exactly have I been aggressive?" Victoria's mouth opened and closed as she searched for an answer that would justify her position. The vodka wasn't helping her cognitive function, and the growing audience of hostile faces wasn't making her feel any more confident. You're intimidating," she finally said. "Sitting there with all those legal papers talking about lawsuits. It feels like a threat. A threat to whom Damon asked. To you personally, or to the mindset of discrimination that my case is designed to address." Emma's viewer count had climbed to over 40,000 people. The live stream was being shared across multiple social media platforms, with clips already appearing on Twitter and TikTok. Hashtag Victoria Ashford was beginning to trend alongside hashtag Christmas flight racism. Victoria took another large gulp of vodka, her movements becoming more unsteady. "My husband is going to hear about this. He has connections. Influence. You can't just attack people like us without consequences." "People like you," Damon repeated. "There's that phrase again. What makes you special, Mrs. Ashford? What protections do you think you have that other people don't?" "We're job creators," Victoria said, her voice rising with drunken indignation. "Richard's company employs thousands of people. We contribute to society. We shouldn't have to deal with troublemakers and complainers who want something for nothing." The cabin erupted in shocked murmurs. Victoria had just dismissed legitimate workplace discrimination complaints as wanting something for nothing while being recorded by multiple devices and broadcast live to tens of thousands of people. David Kim shook his head in disgust. "Lady, you're describing civil rights as wanting something for nothing. You realize how that sounds, right?" "I don't care how it sounds," Victoria snapped, abandoning any pretense of subtlety. "I'm tired of people playing the victim card every time they don't get what they want. Maybe if some people worked harder instead of complaining about fairness, they'd be more successful." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the flight attendants had stopped moving, frozen by the blatant racism that Victoria had just expressed to an audience of witnesses and cameras. Damon Rivers sat back in his seat, a slight smile playing at his lips. As a civil rights attorney, he'd spent years collecting evidence of discriminatory attitudes. But rarely had he encountered such a clear, unambiguous display of racial bias delivered voluntarily and recorded from multiple angles. "Mrs. Ashford," he said quietly, "you should know that everything you've said in the last hour is being recorded by multiple passengers. It's being live-streamed to thousands of viewers. And tomorrow, when I'm in court representing your husband's former employees, I'll be able to demonstrate exactly the kind of attitudes that created the hostile work environment they experienced." Victoria's face went white as the implications hit her alcohol-clouded brain. She looked around the cabin at the faces staring back at her, some disgusted, some fascinated, some pitying, but none of them friendly. You can't use this against my husband," she whispered. "This is personal. This isn't about the company." "Isn't it?" Damon asked. "Because you've just demonstrated that the discriminatory attitudes documented in our lawsuit aren't isolated incidents. They reflect a broader mindset, a culture that extends from corporate boardrooms into first-class cabins." He gestured to his legal files. Every word you've spoken tonight supports our case that Ashford Technologies fostered an environment where certain people were deemed unworthy, where success was reserved for people like you, where complaints about discrimination were dismissed as wanting something for nothing. Victoria clutched her vodka glass like a lifeline, but there was no escape at 35,000 feet. She was trapped with her own words, her own prejudices, and her own spectacular lack of judgment. The plane continued its course toward London, carrying with it a story that would soon become international news. And the night was far from over. 3 hours into the flight, Victoria Ashford had progressed from champagne to vodka and was now demanding wine. Her movements had become increasingly unsteady, her voice louder and more slurred, and her inhibitions had completely evaporated along with any social graces she might have once possessed. "I want a proper wine," Victoria announced, waving her empty vodka glass in Sophia's direction. "Something expensive. I know you keep the good bottles for people who appreciate quality." Sophia approached with visible reluctance. The situation in first class had deteriorated beyond anything in her training manual. Victoria was clearly intoxicated, but airline policy required delicate handling of premium passengers, especially when their behavior hadn't crossed into legally actionable territory. "What type of wine would you prefer?" Mrs. Ashford Sophia asked diplomatically. "Red. Something French. Bordeaux. The 2015 Chateau Margaux, if you have it." Victoria's words came out in careful, overpronounced syllables, the speech pattern of someone fighting to appear sober. Sophia glanced nervously at Jessica, who was documenting every interaction for the inevitable incident report. Serving more alcohol to an already intoxicated passenger violated multiple protocols, but refusing could trigger an even more explosive confrontation. "I'll see what we have available," Sophia replied, hoping to buy time while she figured out how to handle the situation. Meanwhile, Damon Rivers continued working through his case files, seemingly oblivious to Victoria's escalating intoxication. But his calm exterior masked growing concern. He'd represented enough clients who'd been victims of alcohol-fueled racist attacks to recognize the warning signs. Victoria wasn't just drunk. She was building toward something dangerous. Emma Richardson's live stream had now attracted over 60,000 viewers. The chat was moving at lightning speed, with viewers sharing the stream across platforms and major news outlets beginning to pick up the story. Victoria Ashford and #ChristmasFlight, racism were trending globally, and video clips were spreading across social media faster than wildfire. "This is insane," Emma whispered to her camera, trying to balance journalistic coverage with responsible broadcasting. "I've never seen anything like this. We're watching someone's reputation self-destruct in real time." Michael Torres was capturing everything from multiple angles, his filmmaker training telling him this footage would become historically significant. He'd covered protests and rallies, but never witnessed such an intimate display of privilege and prejudice unfolding in such a confined space. David Kim was frantically documenting the incident on his laptop, creating a minute-by-minute timeline with timestamps that could later be verified against the aircraft's flight data. His tech industry background had taught him the importance of creating comprehensive records when witnessing potential legal violations. Victoria stood up unsteadily, using the seat back for support, as Sophia returned with a bottle of expensive Bordeaux. Finally, proper service. She snatched the wine glass without thanking the flight attendant and immediately took a large gulp. The dark red wine stained her lips, giving her an almost vampiric appearance under the cabin's LED lighting. She swayed slightly as she stood, her designer dress wrinkled and her previously perfect hair beginning to show signs of dishevelment. "You know what I don't understand," Victoria announced to the cabin at large, her voice carrying clearly over the engine noise. She gestured broadly with her wine glass, the dark liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "I don't understand why hard-working people like me and Richard have to deal with constant attacks from people who want to blame their failures on everyone else." Damon looked up from his documents, his expression carefully neutral. Is that how you see workplace discrimination, Mrs. Ashford? As people blaming others for their failures? Absolutely. Victoria took another large swig of wine, her movements becoming more exaggerated. Personal responsibility is dead. Instead of working harder, improving themselves, or adapting to company culture, people file lawsuits. They claim racism or sexism or whatever excuse is trendy. She gestured toward Damon with her wine glass, the liquid swirling ominously. People like you make millions convincing minorities that they're victims instead of encouraging them to excel. The cabin was completely silent except for the hum of the engines. Even the flight attendants had stopped moving, watching with horror as Victoria dug herself deeper into a hole of her own making. People like me, Damon repeated slowly. You keep using that phrase, Mrs. Ashford. I'm curious about your definition. Victoria's face was flushed with alcohol and anger. Civil rights lawyers, race baiters, people who profit from division instead of encouraging unity and hard work. And what about people like your husband, Damon? Asked quietly. CEOs who create environments where talented employees are pushed out because they don't fit a particular demographic profile. My husband, Victoria said, swaying slightly as she pointed the wine glass at Damon, built his company from nothing. He deserves respect, not attacks from ungrateful employees who couldn't cut it. Emma's livestream viewers were going absolutely wild. The chat was filled with shocked reactions, angry responses, and people sharing the stream with increasingly urgent messages about the racism being broadcast live from a commercial aircraft. Couldn't cut it. David Kim's voice carried disbelief and anger. Lady, we're talking about engineers with advanced degrees from MIT and Stanford. These aren't people who couldn't cut it. These are people who were excluded despite their qualifications. Victoria whirled to face David, wine sloshing in her glass. Oh, please. Everyone knows about diversity initiatives. Companies are forced to hire unqualified minorities to meet quotas. When they can't perform at the same level as naturally talented people, they cry discrimination. The words hit the cabin like a physical blow. Victoria had just expressed the most toxic stereotypes about affirmative action and minority achievement, demonstrating exactly the kind of thinking that Damon's lawsuit was designed to address. Naturally talented people, Damon said, his voice dangerously quiet. Meaning white people. I assume. Victoria's mouth opened and closed as she realized what she'd said. Even through her alcohol-clouded judgment, she understood she'd crossed a line. But pride and prejudice drove her forward instead of pulling her back. I didn't say that, she stammered. I said naturally talented. That could be anyone. But in the context of your husband's company, Damon pressed the naturally talented people seemed to be overwhelmingly white and male. Interesting coincidence. Victoria's face was now bright red with anger and embarrassment. She raised her wine glass to take another drink, but her hand was shaking with rage. The dark Bordeaux trembled in the glass like liquid fury. You're twisting my words, she accused, pointing at Damon with her free hand while holding the wine glass in the other. You're making me sound like something I'm not. I'm not making you sound like anything, Mrs. Ashford. I'm simply asking you to clarify your statements about natural talent and diversity hiring. Victoria's composure completely shattered. Years of suppressed racism encouraged by wealth and privilege exploded in a moment of alcohol-fueled rage. She stepped forward, moving into the aisle between their seats, wine glass raised like a weapon. I am sick and tired of people like you attacking people like me, she screamed, her voice echoing through the aircraft. We work hard, we contribute to society, and we deserve better than being lectured by... She gestured wildly with the wine glass, searching for words that would hurt without getting her arrested. But alcohol had destroyed her verbal filter, and the racism came pouring out uncensored. By what Mrs. Ashford Damon asked, his voice deadly calm, despite the proximity of an intoxicated hostile woman standing over him. By people who don't belong here. Victoria screamed, the wine glass shaking violently in her hand. People who get everything handed to them and then complain it's not enough. The aircraft hit a pocket of light turbulence at exactly that moment. The plane lurched slightly to the left, a minor bump that passengers barely noticed under normal circumstances. But Victoria Ashford was drunk, angry, off balance, and holding a full glass of red wine directly above Damon Rivers. Whether the turbulence caused the spill or simply provided convenient cover for a deliberate act would later be debated in courtrooms and comment sections. But the result was undeniable. The entire contents of Victoria's wine glass emptied directly onto Damon's head, shoulders, and laptop computer. The dark red Bordeaux soaked through his navy sweater, stained his legal documents, and dripped onto the aircraft floor like spilled blood. The expensive wine that Victoria had demanded so imperiously now covered the black lawyer she'd been attacking for hours. For a moment, the cabin was absolutely silent. Even the engine noise seemed muted as everyone processed what they'd just witnessed. Damon sat motionless, wine dripping from his hair down his face. His legal documents ruined, his computer potentially destroyed. Then Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Oh my God, look what you made me do," she shrieked, not a trace of apology in her voice. "You startled me with all your aggressive questions. Now look at this mess." She looked around the cabin with wild eyes, seeking support for her narrative that she was somehow the victim of this incident. Did everyone see that he was being threatening and aggressive, and when the plane moved, I spilled my drink? This is his fault. The passengers stared back at her in shocked silence. Multiple cameras had captured the incident from different angles. Emma's live stream had recorded everything in real time for over 60,000 viewers. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. But Victoria Ashford, drunk on wine and privilege, continued her performance. "I want him arrested," she declared, pointing at Damon with a wine-stained finger. "He threatened me, caused me to spill my drink, and now he's probably going to claim it was deliberate. This is exactly the kind of victim-playing behavior I was talking about." Damon Rivers sat in his wine-soaked seat, processing the moment with the analytical mind of an attorney who'd spent years documenting discrimination. He was covered in expensive wine. His computer was likely ruined. His legal documents were stained, and he was trapped at 35,000 feet with a racist woman who had just assaulted him while blaming him for the attack. But instead of anger or outrage, Damon felt something else: vindication. Victoria Ashford had just provided the most perfect demonstration of the attitudes and behaviors his lawsuit was designed to address. She'd attacked him, blamed him for her attack, and then demanded his arrest for being the victim of her assault. It was the ultimate expression of the racial privilege and victimhood reversal that characterized modern racism. And it had all been captured on video, live-streamed to thousands, and witnessed by an international audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Morrison's voice came over the intercom, oblivious to the drama unfolding in first class. "We're experiencing some light turbulence. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are fastened." As Damon Rivers sat dripping with wine, surrounded by ruined legal documents, facing a woman who had just assaulted him while claiming to be his victim, he realized that his case against Ashford Technologies had just gotten a lot stronger, and Victoria Ashford's Christmas was about to get much, much worse. The first-class cabin erupted into chaos as wine dripped from Damon's hair onto his ruined legal documents. Victoria Ashford stood swaying in the aisle, her empty wine glass clutched in her hand like evidence of her own victimization, her face a mask of indignant fury that defied all logic and human decency. "Security!" Victoria screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice carrying throughout the aircraft. "I need security immediately. This man threatened me and caused me to spill my drink." Sofia Ramirez rushed forward with towels, her face pale with shock at what she'd just witnessed. In 5 years of airline service, she'd never seen anything like this. "Mr. Rivers, I am so sorry. Let me help you with that. Don't apologize to him," Victoria shrieked, grabbing Sofia's arm. "He's the one who should be apologizing. He was being aggressive and intimidating, and when I tried to move away from him, the plane lurched and I spilled my wine. He caused this Emma Richardson's live stream was exploding. Her viewer count had climbed past 85,000 people, and the chat was moving so fast it was impossible to read individual comments. But the overall sentiment was clear. People were watching in horror as Victoria attempted to gaslight an entire airplane full of witnesses. "This is unbelievable," Emma whispered to her camera, trying to maintain journalistic objectivity while witnessing what was clearly a racially motivated assault. She just poured wine on him and is now claiming he caused it. There are literally dozens of witnesses and multiple cameras that caught everything. Michael Torres was capturing the aftermath from multiple angles, his documentary filmmaker instincts telling him this would become one of the most important pieces of footage he'd ever shot. "This is going to be studied in sociology classes for decades," he muttered to himself while adjusting his camera settings. David Kim was furiously typing on his laptop, creating a real-time account of the incident, while also sharing clips on social media. His tech industry connections meant the story was spreading rapidly through professional networks, reaching people who had direct knowledge of the Ashford Technologies discrimination case. "Ma'am, please calm down," Jessica Collins said nervously, approaching Victoria with obvious reluctance. "We need to assess the situation and make sure everyone is okay." "I'm not calm," Victoria screamed. "I want the air marshal. I want this man arrested. He's been harassing me since takeoff, making me feel unsafe, and now he's going to blame me for an accident." She gestured wildly around the cabin wine glass, still in her hand, her designer dress now wrinkled and stained. Did anyone else see how threatening he was being? How he was interrogating me about my personal life? I felt scared. The elderly British gentleman in seat 4A stood up with obvious disgust. "Madame, I've been watching this entire interaction, and you are the only person on this aircraft who has behaved threateningly. That young man has been nothing but polite despite your appalling behavior." "You don't understand," Victoria said, desperately looking around for any allies in the cabin. "He's a lawyer. He's trying to sue my husband. He's using this flight to intimidate me and gather evidence."